Good evening. Thank everyone for coming tonight. My name is Jim Travers. I'm a U.S. Army combat veteran currently stationed at Fort Hood, and today I'm going to explain to you some of the Army's policies on extremist organizations and their activities. Pictured right here on the left is Army Major Nidal Malik Hassan. In 2009, he walked into a Fort Hood facility and opened fire on 32 people, killing 13 of them. Now, Nidal Hassan was linked through an investigation to terrorist sects, including Al-Qaeda. This is a prime example of how extremist organizations and their activities are infiltrating the Army today. Now, the information you're about to see comes from a number of sources. Army Regulation 27-10 will be covering the command policy. The Center for Military Justice will be covering some of the quotes I'm about to show. The Newest Explosions of Terrorism is where some of these statistics come from. Terrorism in America website was where some of the other information was found. And the Richard Ross Institute is an expert on extremist organizations and their activities. So, moving forward, some militaristic indoctrination percentages have been rising since 1950. What that means is that these extremist organizations are targeting military-minded people. They're targeting them because they already have the makeup of these characteristics they're looking for. They're military-minded. They have an idea for organization. They understand already what it means to use violence and use force to get a point across and to impose fear on people. So, as of 2010, these percentages are up to 89%, according to the Newest Explosions of Terrorism. That means that 89% of all the recruits who end up going to these organizations and their activities are being targeted inside of militaristic organizations. That's an appalling number. So now that we've identified the threat, let's talk more about some examples of involvement. Participating in public demonstrations or rallies. Attending a meeting or activity with knowledge that the meeting or activity involves an extremist cause. Recruiting or training members. Fundraising activities. Creating, organizing, or leading. All of these topics that we're talking about right here are some examples of involvement. And commanders in the Army have their responsibility to identify these, to be aware of them, and to neutralize them. So now that we've talked about some of the examples of involvement, let's identify some extremist groups. And this is only to name a few. We've got the Ku Klux Klan, we've got Hezbollah, the Black Panther Party, Aryan Nations, the Neo-Nazi Alliance, Al-Qaeda, the Abu Nidal Organization, and the Black Liberation Army. Now, all of these things that I've just mentioned right here, these are all people and organizations that promote violent and extremist organization and activity. When they're recruiting people, they will kind of slow play these values and eventually recruit people from the military to actually join up with their cause. So now that we've identified some extremist organizations, we're going to talk about the Army's policy on this. The Army's policy is a zero participation. They have a zero tolerance policy on anything that is identified as extremist in any way. The Army advocates equal opportunity, which means that since we're in the United States, we promote freedoms that other countries don't. We promote the freedom of religion. We don't discriminate based on gender and race, and these are all things that the Army stand on. Isolation and neutralization is the Army's policy whenever something is identified. If it's identified to be linked to an extremist organization, then the Army and their commanders have the responsibility to make sure that an investigation is conducted and that these things are taken seriously and isolated so you don't have repeat incidents like what we had with Nidal Hassan. Osama bin Laden himself, according to the Richard Ross Institute, was recruited as an Afghan freedom fighter before he actually joined Al-Qaeda, which means he was on a lower level of a militaristic organization, and eventually he was indoctrinated, and he became the head of Al-Qaeda. So that is another example of a serious threat. Okay, moving on from Army policy, we're going to talk about what it means to reject participation. Extremist organizations and activities are those that advocate racial, gender, ethnic hatred, or intolerance of any kind. And they use violence. That is the main thing of being an extremist organization. They use violence and fear tactics to attack the hearts of people and attack the minds of people. It's not just about violence. It's also about intimidation. And that's one of the main things that they use. So after talking about rejecting participation, the next topic we're going to be referring to is the command's responsibility, the command authority. The command has always been told and has been telling its soldiers that you were supposed to have no involvement of any kind. And their job is to prohibit soldiers in any way, to give them the awareness of what types of organizations these are, to give them the knowledge that they need to identify these things so that if they succumb to any of these types of recruitments, they can identify it and it can be passed up the chain of command. If any of these things are identified in soldiers, then punitive action can be taken. You can be given Article 15, which is under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which is a way of punishing a soldier. You can also be given a court-martial. These are all serious offenses, and these are all serious things to be taken into consideration. So that's the command's responsibility, to identify, make soldiers aware, and then punish if possible. So, another way to indicate for investment, indicators for investment are membership of any kind, a spoken allegiance. For example, if a soldier is speaking with another soldier and he finds out that he's been going to any rallies, or he's been reading any literature, or he says, oh, I've been doing this, those are really big and strong indicators to send up a red flag to pass up to the chain of command. And of course, presence at an event. If someone were to be linked to going to an event or a rally, then that is obviously a very big indicator that someone might be getting indoctrinated into extremist organizations and their activities. So, in summary, the Army's policy on these extremist organizations and their activities is no tolerance at all. And if you identify any of these extremist organizations infiltrating your unit, the first thing you do is report that up the chain of command. The Army must conduct investigations and administer punishment. These things have to be dealt with seriously. And finally, in order to have full visibility, the Army must maintain its awareness of its organization. It has to have full visibility so at all times it understands the command climate, understands its soldiers, and understands the threat. Thank you very much for your time.